71 million Americans are under heat alerts right now. 50 million will see temperatures above 90 degrees. 11 million will see temperatures above 100 degrees. Death Valley is forecast to hit 117. That is not August. That is not July. That is today. The National Weather Service calls this a slow boil, temperatures building day after day after day. And here is what the headlines are not telling you. Extreme heat already kills more Americans every single year than hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and lightning combined. The CDC says heat-related deaths nearly doubled from 1,156 in 2020 to 2,415 in 2023. And this heat dome arrived weeks earlier than anyone's body or home was ready for it. 61% of the continental United States is already in drought. Dry soil heats up faster than wet soil. The ground itself is working against you. Here's the question nobody in the press conference is asking. If the deadliest weather America faces is the weather we treat like a seasonal inconvenience, how many people will be gone before we admit this is not summer? It is not summer. It is today. And the data says you are not ready. Subscribe. This is the full picture, not the headline version, not the 30-second news clip. This is what the data actually says while the story is still developing, while the numbers are still climbing, while there is still time to do something with the information before the next reading comes in. Drop a comment. Tell us where you are watching from and what time it is there. If you are in Phoenix or Fresno or Las Vegas or anywhere across the Southwest right now, we want to know what it feels like outside your door at this hour. We want to know whether the air feels different than it did a week ago. We want to know whether the houses on your street still have their lights on at midnight. And tell us this. When you heard the words Heatwave on your local news, did they mention that extreme heat kills more Americans than hurricanes and tornadoes combined? Or did they call it summer-like and move on to the next story? Here is what the data actually says. The number we want to start with is 71 million. That is how many Americans are under some form of heat alert as the sun comes up today. 71 million people. That is more than the combined population of California and Texas. That is roughly 1 in every 5 Americans, and that number is not coming from a cable news graphic or a viral tweet. That number is coming directly from the National Weather Service, broken down by county, color-coded on a map that updates every 6 hours. Within that 71 million, the National Weather Service tells us that 50 million Americans will see temperatures above 90 degrees this week. 11 million will see temperatures above 100. And in the deepest pocket of the heat dome, in Death Valley, the forecast high is 117 degrees. That is not a record, but it is also not May. The historical average high for Death Valley today is closer to 99. We are looking at an excess of 18 degrees above what the calendar says should be normal. Phoenix hit 109 degrees on May 11th. That is 1 degree below the all-time record for that date, which was set in 1934. Think about that comparison for a moment. The temperature record that almost fell is older than the interstate highway system. It is older than air conditioning in private homes. It is older than the National Weather Service in its current form, and it nearly fell on a Sunday afternoon in the second week of May. Las Vegas hit 103. Fresno climbed into the upper 90s with a major heat risk classification. Salt Lake City, Boise, Wichita, Kansas City. The heat is not a regional story, it is a national story that has been geographically scattered across 22 states. And because it is scattered, no single local news station has the full picture. Each one is reporting their own city. The pattern is invisible unless you zoom out. Here's the data point that should stop a viewer in their chair. According to the CDC, heat-related deaths in the United States went from 1,156 in 2020 to 2,415 in 2023. Nearly double. In 3 years. That is not a forecast. That is a death certificate count. That is the official tally compiled by the National Center for Health Statistics from coroner reports across every state in the union. Compare those numbers to the weather events that get names. The average annual death toll from tornadoes in the United States is roughly 70. The average from hurricanes is roughly 45. Floods average around 100. Lightning kills about 20 people per year. Add all 4 of those categories together, and you get something in the neighborhood of 235 deaths per year From the storms that dominate every newscast, every emergency broadcast, every cable network's branded weather coverage. Extreme heat killed 2,415 Americans in 2023 alone. That is more than 10 times the combined total. And that number is almost certainly low because heat does not always show up on a death certificate as the cause. A 78-year-old man dies of a heart attack in his apartment in mid-July with the window open and a fan running. The cause of death is cardiac arrest. The actual cause is that his heart had been working at double speed for 4 straight days because his apartment never dropped below 88 degrees, not even at 3 in the morning. That death goes into the cardiac column, not the heat column. What most coverage did not mention was the death toll. The headlines this weekend called this summer-like heat. They called it record warmth. They framed it as a pleasant early summer preview. We pulled the screenshots. We read the articles. The official data shows this is the deadliest weather category America faces, and the CDC's own numbers prove heat kills more people every single year than the storms that get named, tracked, and treated like emergencies. This heat wave has no name. That does not mean it is not dangerous. That is precisely what makes it dangerous. Now think about the timing. This event arrived in the second week of May. The human body acclimates to heat. That is a biological fact. After about 10 to 14 days of consistent exposure to high temperatures, the average healthy adult begins to sweat earlier, sweat more efficiently, and conserve electrolytes better. That is why a 95-degree day in early August feels manageable to someone in Phoenix, while a 95-degree day in early May feels staggering to that same person. In May, nobody in the affected region has had their acclimation period yet. Their bodies are still running on April settings. April in the Southwest averages in the 70s and low 80s. The internal thermostat has not been retrained. The sweat response is still calibrated for spring. And then 109 degrees arrives on a Sunday afternoon. The body does not have a chance to adjust. It just has to absorb the shock. The homes are not ready either. In Phoenix, professional HVAC services typically begin in late May or early June. Air conditioners that have been sitting through a mild winter need to be inspected, recharged, and tested before the heat hits. In a normal year, that happens just in time. This year, the heat hit before the technician's appointment book did. There are houses across the valley right now where the AC has not been tested since last October, and the homeowner is finding out the hard way that the compressor failed sometime over the winter. The infrastructure is not ready. Cooling centers staffed at full summer capacity do not open until June in most jurisdictions. Public pools are still on their spring schedules. School districts have not yet activated their hot weather protocols, which means children are walking home from school in 100-degree heat in May because the calendar says May, not because the thermometer says May. And the warning systems are not calibrated for May either. When the National Weather Service issues an extreme heat warning in July, the public hears the word July and the word heat and connects them. When they hear the word heat and the word May in the same sentence, the brain pushes back. It does not feel real. It feels like an exaggeration. It feels like overreach, and so the warning is heard but not absorbed. That is what the national numbers say, but national numbers do not feel heat. People do. And in one city, the warning system itself almost failed. Look at your hands. Imagine them shaking while you try to call for help. If this is the deadliest weather America faces, why is it treated like a seasonal inconvenience? And what changes when people start collapsing? The city is Phoenix. The population in Maricopa County is roughly 4.5 million people. According to the National Weather Service's own heat risk map, 3.4 million Valley residents are sitting in a moderate heat risk classification this week. Another 2.4 million are in the major heat risk category. That is the second highest tier on a 40-year scale. The scale goes from 0, which is green and means little to no risk, all the way up to 4, which is magenta and means rare, long duration, and dangerous heat for almost everyone exposed. Parts of the Southwest are in magenta right now, in May. Phoenix is a city that knows heat. Phoenix has lived with heat for generations. It is the largest American city in the Sonoran Desert, and it has built its entire civic infrastructure around the assumption that summer will hit hard and last long. The streets are oriented with shade in mind. The buildings are insulated for heat retention in winter and heat rejection in summer. The cooling centers are mapped. The 211 hotline is established, and the local news stations have entire heat desks staffed during the summer months. And even in Phoenix this week, officials looked at the numbers and decided the warning system was not getting through. On the morning of May 11th, the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Phoenix made a decision. The extreme heat warning that had been issued for the weekend was originally set to expire on Sunday evening. The forecast for Monday was hot, but not as hot. The default decision would have been to let the warning lapse on schedule and replace it with a less urgent heat advisory. Instead, the warning was extended through 8 p.m. Monday, May 12th. The reason given was not a change in the forecast. The reason given was that officials looked at the public response over the weekend and concluded that people were not taking the warning seriously enough. The trail count at South Mountain Park was still busy on Saturday afternoon at peak heat. Emergency rooms were already seeing heat-related visits. The local 211 hotline was getting fewer calls than the forecast risk level should have generated. Read that sentence again. The warning was extended not because the heat got worse. The warning was extended because the warning was not working. The data tells a different story than the headline. Most coverage of this event has focused on temperature numbers. The 109 reading in Phoenix, the 117 forecast in Death Valley, the 103 in Las Vegas. Temperatures make for clean television. They scroll across the bottom of the screen. They fit on a graphic. They give the impression of having covered the story. What the temperatures do not tell you is whether anyone is listening. And in Phoenix this week, the answer from the National Weather Service was no. Here is what that actually means. Think of it like this. You have a smoke detector in your kitchen. Most American homes have one. It is white, it is round, it is mounted to the ceiling somewhere near the stove. When it is working properly, it picks up smoke particles in the air and triggers a piercing alarm that you cannot ignore. The alarm is so loud it is uncomfortable. That is intentional. The point of the alarm is not to be informative. The point is to interrupt whatever you are doing and force you to respond. That is how a smoke detector functions normally. You burn toast, the alarm goes off. You wave a dish towel at it. You open a window. The alarm stops. The system worked. Now imagine that smoke detector goes off every single morning at 7 o'clock, whether there is smoke or not. The first week, you take the batteries out at night to get some sleep. The second week, you start ignoring the alarm during the day too. By the third week, the alarm is just part of the background. It is white noise. It is no longer information, it is just sound. That is what happens to extreme heat warnings when they become routine. The system is the same. The alarm is the same. The hazard is real. But the public has stopped hearing it because they have heard it too many times in seasons when the danger felt abstract. So when the danger is finally concrete, the alarm does not register. That is what extreme heat warnings are doing to Phoenix right now. The warning was issued, the warning was extended, and the National Weather Service had to extend it not because the smoke got thicker, but because the people in the house had taken the batteries out. The NWS language in the bulletin was explicit. They used the phrase dangerously hot. They wrote that the public should treat this as a serious and potentially life-threatening event. They did not soften it. They did not hedge. The Phoenix office knows what 109 degrees does to a human body in the second week of May, and they wrote the warning accordingly. The Phoenix Parks and Recreation Department closed multiple hiking trails preemptively. Camelback Mountain, Pistewa Peak, the trails that get the most year-round traffic, and the trails where rescue operations in extreme heat have historically gone wrong. The closure is not a suggestion. It is enforced by park rangers, and the reason it is enforced is because during a 2023 heat wave, the Phoenix Fire Department conducted 219 mountain rescue operations in a single summer, many of them for people who thought they could handle the heat because they had handled it before. The 211 hotline has been activated. That hotline connects callers directly to cooling center locations, transportation assistance, and welfare check requests for elderly neighbors. The cooling centers themselves are a network of public libraries, community centers, senior centers, and faith-based facilities that open their doors to anyone who needs to escape the heat. Some of them serve water, some of them serve a meal. All of them have functioning air conditioning and a place to sit. And here's the part that should land. Even with all of this infrastructure in a city that has built itself around the certainty of brutal summer heat, the National Weather Service felt the need to extend the warning by an extra day because the public was not absorbing the message. Phoenix is the test case. Phoenix is the city that, in theory, should be most prepared. Phoenix has the cooling centers, the trained meteorologists, the public health protocols, the historical experience, the cultural knowledge passed down through generations of desert residents who learned from their parents how to survive a Sonoran summer. If the warning system is straining in Phoenix, what does it look like in cities that have never needed to think about heat? What does it look like in Kansas City, where the all-time May record is much lower and the population has no muscle memory for triple-digit temperatures? What does it look like in Oklahoma City, where the residential infrastructure assumes that May is mild? What does it look like in the small towns of western Nebraska, where the nearest cooling center might be 40 miles away and the nearest hospital might be 60? Phoenix is not the place where this heat wave will do the most damage. Phoenix is the place where the heat wave is most visible. The actual damage will happen in the places where heat is invisible because it has never been part of the local conversation. You have felt a car after it sits in the sun for an hour. Now imagine that feeling inside your own home. If Phoenix, a city built for heat, is struggling to get people to take an extreme heat warning seriously, how do you warn a city that has never needed one before? The ground itself is part of the answer. And the ground itself is part of the problem. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, which is operated jointly by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, 61% of the continental United States is currently classified as being in some level of drought. That is the reading from May 5th, the most recent official update before this heat dome locked into place. 61%, 3 out of every 5 acres of American soil between the two coasts. The breakdown by state is where the picture gets sharper. Colorado is sitting at 96% drought coverage. Utah has roughly 60% of its land in extreme drought, which is level 3 on a 4-level scale. Florida, on the other side of the country and in an entirely different climate zone, is at approximately 99%. Nebraska is at 88%. Oklahoma is at 81%. Kansas is at 60%. These are not minor anomalies. These are the conditions of the soil, the conditions of the vegetation, the conditions of the water table across enormous swaths of the country. And the heat dome is moving directly over them. Here's what most people misunderstand about drought. They picture cracked earth, dead lawns, low reservoirs. Those are the visible signs. The invisible sign, and the one that matters most for this story, is what dry soil does to the air above it. When the ground is dry, it heats up faster. That is the simple version. The longer version is that moisture in soil acts as a thermal buffer. Water has a high heat capacity, which is the technical term for how much energy it takes to raise the temperature of a given mass. Dry soil has a much lower heat capacity, so when the sun hits dry soil, the temperature of that soil rises rapidly, and the soil radiates that heat back up into the atmosphere. The air directly above the dry ground gets hotter than it would over moist ground. That hotter air then dries the soil even further. The feedback loop tightens with every passing hour. NOAA explicitly identifies this mechanism as a driver of record-breaking temperature potential in drought-stricken regions. Their meteorologists do not treat it as theory. They treat it as a quantitative factor in temperature forecasts. When they look at the Plains states this week and project that record daily highs may be set in northwest Texas, western and central Oklahoma, and southern Kansas, they are not just forecasting an air mass moving in. They are forecasting an air mass moving in over ground that is going to amplify it. Think of it like this: a cast iron skillet sitting on a kitchen counter. You have one in your kitchen, or your mother had one, or your grandmother had one. The pan is heavy. It is dark gray. The handle is the same material as the rest of the pan. It is the most reliable cooking surface in any American kitchen. and it has been for more than 100 years. If the skillet is empty and dry and you turn the burner on low, watch what happens. Within seconds, the handle is too hot to touch. The heat transfers almost instantly from the burner through the iron to every part of the pan. The empty skillet has no buffer. There is nothing for the heat to soak into except the metal itself, and so the metal absorbs all of it, all the way to the handle, all the way to the edge. Now put water in that same skillet. Fill it halfway. Turn the burner on low. Watch what happens this time. The water absorbs the heat. The metal stays cooler, longer. You can touch the handle and feel that it is warm, but not dangerous. The water is doing the work. The water is buffering the system. Eventually, the water will boil off, and once it does, the skillet behaves like the empty skillet again. The handle becomes untouchable. The metal becomes a hazard. But as long as the water is there, the pan is manageable. That is what drought is doing to the American West right now. The water is gone. The skillet is dry. Every degree of heat goes straight into the ground and straight back up into the air above you. There is no buffer left. There is no moisture in the soil to soak up the energy of the sun. The western half of the country is a cast iron skillet sitting on a burner that does not turn off until the sun goes down. And in this case, even when the sun goes down, the metal stays hot. The state-by-state data sharpens the picture further. Colorado at 96% drought is not a state in mild trouble. It is a state where the snowpack failed to deliver the spring runoff that the rivers and reservoirs were counting on. It is a state where the high mountain meadows are entering May already crispy. Utah at 60% extreme drought is a state where the soil moisture readings in the agricultural valleys are at levels normally not seen until August. Florida at 99% drought is the strange one. Florida is supposed to be wet. Florida is the rain state. And yet the U.S. Drought Monitor shows almost the entire peninsula in some level of drought as of May 5th, which means even the swamps are running dry. The plains numbers matter most for this week. Nebraska at 88%, Oklahoma at 81%, Kansas at 60%. These are the states the heat dome is about to roll over. The NOAA Climate Prediction Center's Week 2 Hazards Outlook, issued on May 5th, flagged moderate risk of extreme heat across northwestern Texas into Oklahoma for May 13th and 14th, and slight risk extending into southern Kansas through May 15th. When those forecasters wrote that bulletin, they were not just looking at the air temperature models, they were looking at the soil moisture data. They knew the heat dome was coming, they knew the ground was dry, and they knew the combination would produce temperatures that would not have been possible over moist soil. The same ridge of high pressure over a plains region that had received normal spring rainfall would have produced a hot week. Over the ground we actually have, it will produce a potentially record-setting week. There is one more piece of the drought story that the headlines have almost entirely ignored. The 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome, which we are going to come back to later in this briefing, hit a region that was in drought but not as severely as the current western drought. The 2021 event was geographically narrower. This event is geographically broader. The 2021 event hit ground that still had some moisture buffering. This event is hitting ground that has been depleted by years of cumulative deficit. The U.S. Drought Monitor is run by people who classify drought severity weekly. They use a 5-category system. D0 is abnormally dry. D1 is moderate drought. D2 is severe. D3 is extreme. D4 is exceptional. As of the May 5th reading, large portions of the West are in D3 and D4. Those are the categories where ecosystems start to collapse, where livestock operations become unsustainable, and where the soil moisture deficit becomes so deep that even a normal summer of rainfall would not replenish it. The heat dome is sitting on top of D3 and D4 soil. The skillet is dry, and the burner is on high. That is the ground. But what about the air you breathe at 2 in the morning, when you are supposed to be recovering? Step outside tonight. Feel that air on your skin. It is not supposed to feel like this in May, when the ground itself is working against you, when the skillet is dry and every degree of heat bounces back into the air above you. How hot can it actually get? The answer the National Weather Service has provided in writing, in the official forecast discussion for the Southwest, is that nighttime lows will stay in the 70s across the heat dome's footprint. That single data point is the most underreported number of this entire event. It is also the most dangerous. The reason it is dangerous is because the human body is not designed to take heat continuously. The human body is designed to take heat with breaks. Daytime exposure is supposed to be followed by overnight recovery. That is the rhythm the cardiovascular system evolved around. Every system in the human body, from the kidneys to the lungs to the brain, depends on a window of cooler hours to reset. When nighttime lows stay in the 70s, that window does not exist. The body never gets the break. The cumulative load just keeps building. Here is what that actually means. A rubber band. The most ordinary object in any American household. Most kitchen drawers have a handful of them. Most office desks have a few. They are brown or beige, or sometimes the green ones from the produce aisle. They are made of natural latex stretched into a circle, and they have one job, which is to bend without breaking. Stretch a rubber band once, it snaps back into place. No damage. The latex molecules are designed to return to their original shape after deformation. Do that every day for a week. Pick up the rubber band, stretch it, let it go. It still works. The molecular structure has elasticity. That is the entire point of the rubber band. Now do something different. Stretch that rubber band and hold it stretched. Do not let it go. Hold it for an hour. Hold it for a day. Hold it for 3 days straight. When you finally let go, watch what happens. It does not snap back. It stays stretched. The latex molecules have lost their memory. They have been held in deformation long enough that they cannot remember what their original shape was. The rubber band is permanently weakened. It might still work for a while longer, but it will never be the same rubber band it was before. That is what nights in the 70s do to the human body when the days are over 100. The cardiovascular system stays stretched. The heart stays stretched. The lungs stay stretched. The kidneys never get the break they need to recover. On day 1, the body handles it. On day 2, the body handles it, but with effort. On day 3, the body is struggling. And on day 4, when the person thinks they are fine because they have been functioning through 3 days of heat, the body does not snap back. The body has been holding the stretch too long. Something gives way. Sometimes it is the heart, sometimes it is the kidneys, sometimes it is the brain. The medical literature on this is precise. Heat-related mortality does not spike on the first hot day. It spikes on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th hot days. Emergency departments call it the Heatwave delayed response curve. The chart is almost identical for every major heat event ever studied. Day 1 looks normal. Day 2 looks normal. By day 4, the emergency room admissions are surging. By day 5, the morgue admissions are surging. The reason is that human heat injury accumulates silently. A person who has been mildly dehydrated for 3 days, with a heart rate elevated for 3 days, with kidney function depressed for 3 days, can collapse without warning on day 4. They will tell their family that morning that they feel fine. They will tell their doctor that they feel fine. And then, in the middle of the afternoon, they will not feel fine, and by the time the ambulance arrives, the window is closed. The populations most at risk are the ones we already know. Adults over 65. People with cardiovascular conditions. People with kidney conditions. People with respiratory conditions. People on certain medications, including some blood pressure medications, some psychiatric medications, and some diuretics which can impair the body's ability to regulate heat. The NWS Phoenix forecast discussion specifically identifies older adults as a high-risk population during this event. There are an estimated 15 to 20 million Americans over the age of 65 living in the 22 states currently under heat alerts. That is the high-risk population in raw numbers. A meaningful fraction of those individuals live alone. A meaningful fraction of them live without working air conditioning, either because they cannot afford it, or because their unit failed and has not been repaired, or because they grew up in a generation that did not consider air conditioning necessary and have never installed it. There is a category of person who will not turn on the air conditioner even when they have one, because they are worried about the electricity bill. We are not making that up. Public health researchers have documented this behavior repeatedly. An elderly person on a fixed income looks at the thermostat and does the math. The math says that running the AC for 12 hours a day at 109 degrees outside will cost more than they have budgeted for the month. So they leave the AC off. They open a window, they sit by a fan, they drink water, they tell themselves they will be fine. The data tells a different story than the headline. Headlines emphasize peak daytime highs. The 117 in Death Valley, the 109 in Phoenix, the 103 in Las Vegas, the numbers that make for dramatic graphics. The official data from the National Weather Service says the real danger is what happens at night, when the public cannot feel the threat. The NWS explicitly warns that nighttime lows in the 70s limit the body's ability to recover. That information is buried past the first paragraph in most coverage, or it is missing entirely. Why is it buried? Because nighttime low temperatures do not make for compelling television. A graphic that says 117 degrees in Death Valley grabs attention. A graphic that says 78 degrees in Phoenix at 4 a.m. does not. And yet, the 78-degree reading at 4 a.m. is the more medically dangerous number because it is the absence of recovery that kills. The cumulative stress concept also explains why heat waves disproportionately kill people who have lived through previous heat waves. A 73-year-old who survived the brutal Phoenix summers of 2019, 2020, and 2023 might assume they are heat-hardened. They are not. They are heat-eroded. Each previous summer reduced their cardiovascular reserve. Each previous summer aged their kidneys a little faster than chronological time. The compounded damage is invisible until the next event, and then the next event is the one that takes them. The NWS does not put it in those terms in their public bulletins. They use the phrase prolonged exposure. They use the phrase recovery limited. They use the phrase vulnerable populations. The medical reality behind the bureaucratic language is what we have just described. The body cannot hold the stretch indefinitely. The body will give. The only question is when. This is also why the early season timing of the current heat dome is so corrosive. In a normal year, the first heat wave of summer arrives in late June or early July, after most vulnerable people have had a few weeks of warm but not extreme weather to begin their acclimation. The body adapts somewhat. The heart and kidneys get a gradual warning that summer is coming. The transition is partial, but it exists. This year, that transition has been skipped. The bodies in the affected region went from April mildness directly to May extremes. There was no warm-up. There was no rehearsal. The first heat wave of the season is the most extreme one most cities will see all year, and it is hitting people whose bodies have not had a single training day. The NWS guidance during events like this is clear. Air conditioning at night is not a luxury, it is a medical necessity. The CDC has issued similar guidance in past heat events. A working air conditioner running through the overnight hours is the single most effective intervention to prevent heat-related mortality. Not the most effective intervention available, the single most effective intervention, period. There is no fan strategy, no hydration strategy, no behavioral strategy that comes close. And yet, there are millions of Americans tonight in homes without functioning air conditioning. There are millions more who have it but cannot afford to run it. There are millions more who could afford to run it but will not, because they have been raised to believe that 78 degrees indoors is comfortable enough. The data says it is not. The data says the rubber band is being held stretched, and on day 4, the body does not snap back. That is what heat does to the body when the sun goes down. But heat does not only hurt people, it also changes the land, and what the land becomes when it is this dry and this hot is something that spreads faster than any temperature reading. You have woken up thirsty in the middle of the night. Now imagine waking up because your body cannot cool itself down. Your body cools down at night. The National Weather Service says this heat takes that away. How many nights can the human body survive without ever truly cooling down? The land is the next system in line. Red flag warnings are flying across large portions of California as of May 13th. Not in August, not in September, in May. Because this heat wave has turned early spring into fire season overnight, A red flag warning is a specific National Weather Service product. It is issued when the combination of temperature, wind, and humidity reaches a threshold where any ignition source, a downed power line, a spark from a chainsaw, a tossed cigarette, a lightning strike, has a high probability of producing a fast-moving wildfire that fire crews will struggle to contain. Red flag warnings are not advisory language. They trigger prepositioning of fire resources. They change the rules under which utility companies operate. They are the closest thing the Weather Service has to a wildfire emergency declaration before the fire actually starts. The criteria for a red flag warning typically include sustained winds above 15 to 25 miles per hour, relative humidity below 15%, and air temperatures elevated enough to dry vegetation rapidly. All three of those criteria are being met simultaneously across large parts of California this week. The wind is coming off the ridges, the humidity has crashed into single digits in some interior valleys, and the temperatures are running well above seasonal normals. NOAA's outlook for May fire potential, published before this heat dome arrived, identified above normal significant fire potential across parts of the Southwest and the Northern Plains. That outlook anticipated elevated risk. What is actually happening on the ground is exceeding the anticipation. Fire crews in Arizona and New Mexico are already engaged in multiple wildfires this week. The Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management has activated additional resources. The New Mexico State Forestry has done the same. These are not catastrophic incidents yet. But the season is not supposed to be active yet either. Think of it like this: a bundle of newspapers sitting on a porch. The classic American image of the morning paper tied with string or rubber bands, or sometimes nothing at all, dropped at the foot of the front door by a delivery person who finished their route before dawn. The bundle is dense. The paper is thick. The print smells faintly of ink. Every house on the block has one of these bundles at some point. If those newspapers are delivered on a cool, damp morning, with dew on the lawn and fog still hanging in the trees, and you held a lighter to the corner of the bundle, watch what happens. The flame would struggle. The paper would smoke. Maybe the edge would scorch. The moisture inside the fibers would push back against the fire. You would have to work to get a serious flame going. The newspapers would resist because the moisture is doing what moisture does, which is to absorb energy that would otherwise feed a flame. Now leave those same newspapers on the porch for 2 weeks of 100-degree heat with no rain and no humidity. Watch what happens to them. The pages turn brown. They curl at the edges. The ink starts to fade. The fibers in the paper dehydrate completely. The bundle becomes lighter. It rustles when you touch it. It has a different sound than it did 2 weeks ago. Hold a lighter to the corner now. The entire bundle goes up in seconds. There is no resistance. The fire moves through the paper as if the paper were waiting for it. Within a minute, the porch is on fire. Within 5 minutes, the front of the house is on fire. There is no struggle phase. There is no smoking phase. The newspapers have been waiting for an ignition source, and the ignition source has arrived. That is what this May heat dome has done to the vegetation across the Southwest. Every plant, every shrub, every patch of grass, every tree branch, every fallen pine needle that should still be green and moist in mid-May is now a bundle of newspapers sitting in the sun. The fibers are dehydrated. The resistance is gone. All it needs is one spark. The sparks are everywhere. Wind brings down a power line. A car drags a piece of metal across pavement and sends out a shower of sparks. A lawnmower hits a rock. A campfire is not fully extinguished. A lightning strike from a dry thunderstorm hits a dead tree on a ridge. The sparks have always been there. What has changed is the fuel. The fuel right now is unprecedented for mid-May. The Sierra Nevada foothills, which would normally still be retaining moisture from the spring snowpack, are reporting fuel moisture readings more typical of late July. The chaparral country east of San Diego is in the same condition. The grasslands of the Central Valley, which should be transitioning from green to gold over the next 3 to 4 weeks, have already finished the transition and are entering the brown, brittle stage. Fire ecologists have a term for vegetation in this condition. They call it cured. A cured fuel is one that is fully dried out and is ready to burn. The seasonal curing process normally takes months and is gradual. The current heat dome has cured huge expanses of California vegetation in a matter of days. The fuels are weeks ahead of schedule. There is another factor, the wind. California's most destructive fires have historically come during wind events. The Santa Ana winds in Southern California, the Diablo winds in the Bay Area, the Fohane winds along the eastern slope of the Sierra. Those winds are seasonal but unpredictable. They can arrive anytime the atmospheric pressure gradient sets up correctly. And this week, with the heat dome forcing strong gradients along its edges, wind events are firing across the state. When you put a wind event on top of cured fuels, you get the conditions for the fires that make national news. The 2017 Tubbs Fire in Sonoma County, the 2018 Camp Fire in Paradise, the 2020 Glass Fire, the 2025 Palisades Fire. Every one of those events combined extreme heat, low humidity, and a wind event over already stressed vegetation. The red flag warning is the National Weather Service telling fire managers that all three ingredients are present right now, and that the ignition is the only missing variable. The institutional fire response is moving faster than usual this year because of those memories. CAL FIRE has pre-deployed engines to high-risk corridors. Air tankers are positioned at multiple bases. Strike teams are on shorter response times. The mutual aid agreements between counties have been activated earlier than normal. The fire community knows what they are looking at. What the public does not always know is that the fire season in the American West has been getting longer for 2 decades. The historical fire season used to run roughly from June through October. Now it runs from April through November in many parts of California, and it has begun in February or March in some years. The current heat dome is not creating a new pattern. It is accelerating a pattern that was already in motion. The compounding effect with drought is critical to understand. Drought reduces soil moisture. Reduced soil moisture means trees and shrubs cannot uptake the water they need to maintain healthy foliage. Stressed vegetation drops needles, drops leaves, and produces more dead material on the forest floor. That dead material is fuel. Then heat arrives and the fuel cures faster. Then wind arrives and the fuel is ready to ignite. Every step in the chain has been preloaded by the drought. NOAA's seasonal outlook explicitly ties the elevated fire risk to the mid-May heat wave. They are not treating it as a coincidence. They are treating it as a causal chain. The heat dome did not arrive into a neutral environment. It arrived into an environment already primed for fire by drought, and the heat dome has accelerated the primed environment to the ignition-ready stage. The communities at greatest risk include the wildland-urban interface neighborhoods that have been the focus of fire planning for the past decade. Foothill communities outside Los Angeles. The communities along the Sierra Nevada Front Range. The communities tucked into the canyons north and east of San Francisco. The communities in the chaparral country of San Diego County. Each of those neighborhoods has evacuation plans, defensible space requirements, and fire-resistant building codes that have been strengthened since the major fires of recent years. Each of those neighborhoods is now sitting next to fuels that are weeks ahead of schedule. That is the fire risk, but the heat dome is not staying in the Southwest. It is moving. And where it is going, people have no idea what is about to hit them. You have seen a wildfire on the news. Now imagine that fire starting in a place that never needed to think about fire before. Here is the open loop. This heat wave has turned May into fire season, and the question nobody can answer is, if fire season is starting this early, how long will it last, and how much will it burn before it ends? The NOAA Climate Prediction Center's week 2 Hazards Outlook, the most authoritative federal forecast product for the 7 to 14-day window, identifies a moderate risk of extreme heat across northwestern Texas into Oklahoma for May 13th and 14th. The same outlook identifies a slight risk of extreme heat extending into southern Kansas through May 15th. The National Blend of Models, which is the consensus product that NOAA uses to integrate multiple forecast models, predicts record daily highs across northwestern Texas, western and central Oklahoma, and southern Kansas during this window. For mid-May in the southern plains, record daily highs typically run in the upper 90s and low hundreds. The forecast for this week is for some of those record highs to be matched or exceeded, upper 90s to near 100 in the second week of May, across a region where the all-time May records are not much higher, is the kind of forecast that puts emergency managers on alert. The Plains states are not Phoenix. The Plains states do not have the same infrastructure. The Plains states do not have the same cultural memory of heat. The Plains states are agricultural economies where farmers and ranchers are working long hours outdoors in May, because May is when the planting decisions and the calving and the irrigation setup all happen at once. The heat is going to arrive in the middle of the work cycle, not at a moment of seasonal pause. And the ground beneath the plains is dry. Nebraska at 88% drought, Oklahoma at 81%, Kansas at 60%. The same skillet and water dynamic that we walked through earlier is going to be in play. The air mass coming in is hot. The ground receiving it is parched. The combination is what produces the kind of temperatures that break records. The 2021 heat dome did not hit the plains. It hit the Pacific Northwest. The current heat dome is broader. It is going to affect regions that have not, in living memory, faced a triple-digit reading in May. And many of those regions are populated by people who pride themselves on toughness. The plains have a culture of self-reliance. There is a generational stoicism that runs through the rural communities of western Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and the Nebraska Sandhills. That stoicism is admirable in many situations. In an extreme heat event, it can be lethal. A rancher in his late 60s who has been working cattle for 50 years is not going to come inside because the temperature hit 99. He has worked through hotter days. He has worked through every kind of weather. The fact that the calendar says May does not change his work routine. And so he stays outside. He keeps moving, his heart rate stays elevated. By the time he feels dizzy, the damage is already underway. The medical facilities in rural plains communities are not equipped for surge events. A county hospital with a 12-bed capacity, 2 hours from the nearest tertiary care center, cannot absorb 30 heat-related admissions in a 48-hour window. The ambulance response times are long. The cooling resources are limited. The volunteer fire departments that provide first response in many of these communities are stretched even in normal years. The economic geography matters too. Many of the small towns the heat is moving toward are towns where the median household income is well below the national average, where electricity costs have been rising, where air conditioning is not universal in older homes, and where a meaningful percentage of the population is over 65 and living on Social Security. These are the demographic conditions that turn heat events into mortality events. You remember the summer of 2021. You remember how hot it was. Now imagine that heat arriving in May instead of June. Nebraska is 88% drought. Oklahoma is 81%. Kansas is 60%. The heat dome is moving directly over them. Do you think a region that has never needed to think about May heat waves is prepared? Or do you think they are about to learn the hard way? The 2021 comparison is the historical anchor for this entire event. In late June of 2021, a high-pressure ridge parked itself over the Pacific Northwest and stayed for the better part of a week. The result was a heat dome of such intensity that scientists, after the fact, classified it as a once-in-10,000-year event under pre-climate change baselines. The numbers from that week still read like science fiction. Portland, Oregon hit 116 degrees on June 28, 2021. That was the all-time record for the city, and it was set in a week where the daily high broke the previous all-time record 3 days in a row. Seattle hit 108. The state of Oregon hit 119 degrees, a new state record. The state of Washington hit 120, a new state record. Up in British Columbia, the small village of Lytton hit 121 degrees, the highest temperature ever recorded in Canada. Lytton then burned to the ground the following day in a wildfire ignited by the heat-cured conditions. According to the analyses compiled after the event, 156 all-time daily maximum temperature records were tied or broken across the affected region. The death toll, calculated using excess mortality methods, because heat does not always show up as the proximate cause on a death certificate, came to an estimated 600-plus deaths in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia combined. The vast majority of the dead were elderly. Many lived alone. Many had no air conditioning. Many had survived previous summers and assumed they could survive this one. The meteorological mechanism behind the 2021 event was the same as the mechanism behind the current event. A stationary high-pressure ridge, often called an omega block because of its characteristic shape on weather maps, parked over the western United States and trapped hot air beneath it. The omega block is named for the Greek letter omega, which the ridge resembles in cross-section. When this pattern sets up, the air underneath the ridge cannot escape vertically because the high pressure pushes it back down, and it cannot escape horizontally because the surrounding atmospheric flow has been deflected around the obstruction. The air just sits and bakes. What is happening in May 2026 is the same pattern, the same omega block, the same stationary ridge, the same trapping of hot air. There are three differences. The first difference is timing. The 2021 event arrived in late June after the Pacific Northwest had experienced a warm spring and a slow buildup. The 2026 event arrived in May, before the region had any acclimation period. Bodies are less prepared. Homes are less prepared. Infrastructure is less prepared. The second difference is geographic scope. The 2021 event was concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, a region of perhaps 15 million people. The 2026 event is already affecting 22 states and 50 million people, and forecast to expand further as the ridge shifts eastward. The third difference is drought. The 2021 event hit a region that was in drought, but the drought was regional. The 2026 event is hitting a country where 61% of the continental land area is in drought, and the heat dome is moving over the most severely affected ground. Each of those differences is a factor that increases the potential mortality compared to 2021. The earlier timing means bodies are less ready. The broader scope means more people are exposed. The deeper drought means temperatures will run hotter for any given air mass. None of those factors guarantee a higher death toll than 2021, but all of them push the probability in that direction. The Oregon Encyclopedia, published by the Oregon Historical Society, classifies the June 2021 heat dome as one of the deadliest natural disasters in Oregon's recorded history. The University of Washington Climate Impacts Group conducted extensive post-event analysis and concluded that climate change made the event between 150 and 1,000 times more likely than it would have been in a pre-industrial climate. That is not a typo. The lower bound of their probability adjustment is 150-fold. If 2021 was the first event of its kind in 10,000 years under the old baselines, the question scientists faced afterward was whether that 10,000-year recurrence interval still applied. The consensus answer, embedded in dozens of peer-reviewed papers since 2021, has been no. The recurrence interval for events of similar magnitude has been compressed to something on the order of decades, not millennia. The next event was expected. The only question was when. The answer to when has now arrived. It is May 2026. It is not a perfect repeat of 2021. It is broader, it is earlier, it is hitting drier ground. The institutional response in 2021 was instructive. Cities that had never planned for extreme heat were caught flat-footed. Portland's tree canopy, which is sparse in the lower-income neighborhoods east of the Willamette River, became a documented mortality factor. Neighborhoods with more shade trees had lower death rates. Neighborhoods with fewer shade trees had higher death rates. The geographic distribution of death tracked the geographic distribution of tree cover. That finding has shaped urban planning conversations across the country in the years since. Seattle's experience was similar. The buildings designed to retain heat in winter with thick walls and limited ventilation became ovens during the dome. Homes without air conditioning, which historically had been most homes in Seattle because the maritime climate had not required cooling, became dangerous environments. After 2021, residential air conditioning installation in Seattle accelerated dramatically. The metro area still has lower AC penetration than most American cities, but the gap has narrowed. The question that should follow from this history is what other regions might experience similar surprises. The current heat dome is moving over regions that, like Seattle in 2021, do not have a strong cultural or infrastructural relationship with extreme heat. The smaller cities of the plains, the river towns of the Mississippi Valley, the agricultural communities of the Central Valley. These are places where the assumption has been that extreme heat is a problem for somewhere else. That assumption was wrong in 2021 for Seattle and Portland. The data suggests it is wrong now for the Plains and the central United States more broadly. Think of someone you know over 70. Now imagine them alone in a house with no air conditioning. That was 2021. That is also right now. Scientists called the 2021 heat dome a once-in-10,000-year event. It happened again 4 years later. The question that nobody can answer yet is, if 2021 was the warning, what is 2026? The number 50 million keeps returning, and it should. 50 million Americans will see temperatures above 90 degrees this week. That is more people than live in California, more than live in any single American state, more than the combined population of New York, Florida, and Illinois. And most of them have no idea they are part of a national pattern. The geographic span runs from the Pacific coast through the Intermountain West, across the plains, and into the western edges of the Mississippi Valley. 22 states are under some form of heat alert. The major cities in the alert footprint include Phoenix, Las Vegas, Fresno, Bakersfield, Salt Lake City, Boise, Albuquerque, El Paso, Wichita, Oklahoma City, Kansas City, Tulsa, Amarillo, Lubbock, Denver, Colorado Springs, Reno, Sacramento. The list keeps going. Inside those metropolitan areas, the alert classifications vary. Some areas are under excessive heat warnings. Others are under heat advisories. Others are simply within the heat risk yellow or orange zones, which are advisory but not warning. The variation reflects how the NWS calibrates risk relative to local norms. A 95-degree day in Phoenix is unremarkable. A 95-degree day in Denver in May is a significant departure. The heat risk system tries to capture the local departure dimension, not just the absolute number. The rural communities inside the alert footprint are the ones least visible in the news coverage. The small towns of eastern California along Highway 395, the mining communities of southern Nevada, the ranching country of southeastern Oregon, the agricultural towns of the San Joaquin Valley, the Hispanic communities of the Central Valley and the Imperial Valley, many of whose residents work in agriculture and cannot stop working because the season demands it. The native communities of the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Reservation, the Mountain Ute Reservation, where the cooling infrastructure has historically been underfunded and the power grid is less reliable. The agricultural workforce deserves a specific accounting. Across the affected states, there are millions of seasonal and year-round outdoor workers whose jobs do not pause for heat. Farm workers in the Central Valley are picking strawberries, lettuce, and citrus right now. Construction workers in Phoenix are building the houses that are being sold to people moving into the region. Landscapers are mowing, trimming, and planting on schedules dictated by their clients. Delivery drivers are walking from air-conditioned cabs to the sun-baked sidewalk every few minutes for an entire shift. These workers are paid by the hour or by the piece. Stopping work costs them money they do not have. Continuing work costs them their bodies. The choice is structural, not individual, and the choices being made this week are being shaped by economic pressure that the heat does not care about. The hurricane comparison is instructive in this context. When a hurricane approaches the Gulf Coast, the entire national news apparatus turns toward it. There is a named storm. There is a forecast cone. There is a track. There is a category. There are landfall projections. There are evacuation orders. The storm has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The story is narratable. The threat is visualizable. The public knows how to relate to it. A heat dome has none of those features. There is no name. The dome is not even technically a storm. There is no forecast cone because the geography is fuzzy. There is no category because the intensity is variable. There are no landfall projections because the dome does not land. There are no evacuation orders because there is nowhere to evacuate to that is meaningfully cooler. The threat is invisible. The temperature reading on a thermometer does not convey the medical reality the way a wind speed reading conveys the structural reality of a hurricane. Unlike hurricanes, there is no named storm to track. Heat is invisible until it kills. That sentence is the institutional gap of this event in a single line. The hurricane has a name because the meteorological community decided decades ago that naming hurricanes would improve public awareness and response. The naming worked. People remember Katrina, people remember Sandy, people remember Harvey. The names became cultural anchors that made the storms easier to plan around and easier to learn from. There has been an academic debate in recent years about whether extreme heat events should be named the same way. Some cities have experimented with the idea. Seville, Spain named a heatwave Zoe in 2022. Athens, Greece has considered similar approaches. The American meteorological community has not adopted a naming convention for heat events, in part because the geographic and temporal definitions are harder than they are for hurricanes. Where does a heat dome start? Where does it end? Whose name do you put on it? The result is that the deadliest weather America faces has no proper noun attached to it. It just becomes summer-like heat, or record warmth, or the heat wave of the week. There is no Katrina to remember. There is no Sandy to learn from. There are just numbers that fade once the temperature drops. You have flipped a switch and nothing happened. Now imagine that happening when it is 109 degrees outside. There is no named storm. There is no cone of uncertainty. There is just heat, invisible, silent, and already inside your home. Do you think 50 million people can be warned about a threat they cannot see? Or is invisible always treated like it is not real? The power grid is the next system that has not been tested at this scale in May. The California Independent System Operator, known as CAISO, manages roughly 80% of the state's electric grid. CAISO publishes daily forecasts of expected demand, available supply, and reserve margins. When the margins get tight, CAISO issues flex alerts to the public asking for voluntary conservation. When the margins fail entirely, CAISO orders rolling blackouts to prevent a grid collapse. The California Energy Commission has stated that 500 megawatts of contingency resources are available for extreme events this summer. That is a meaningful reserve. It is also not unlimited. The same commission report acknowledged that no power grid is immune to challenges during emergencies. That phrase is bureaucratic English for the grid can fail, and the grid does fail, and we cannot promise it will not fail this time. Heat waves stress the grid in two directions simultaneously. They increase demand because air conditioners are running everywhere, and they reduce supply because high temperatures degrade the efficiency of transmission lines, transformers, and generation equipment. Power plants that run on natural gas turbines lose output as the inlet air gets hotter. Solar panels actually produce less efficiently at extreme temperatures, contrary to public intuition. Transmission lines sag in the heat, which limits the amount of current that can be safely carried. The August 2020 rolling blackouts in California are the precedent that grid operators reference most often. During that event, CAISO ordered the first rolling blackouts in the state since 2001. The blackouts affected hundreds of thousands of customers, lasted between 15 minutes and 4 hours per outage, and triggered a state investigation that ultimately concluded the planning models had underestimated demand and overestimated supply. The investigation led to new procurement requirements that have added capacity since 2020. The August 2020 event happened in August. That is the relevant context for what is happening now. The current heat wave is wider than the 2020 event, and it is happening in May. The capacity additions since 2020 have been calibrated to summer demand patterns. They have not been tested in May. The maintenance cycles for grid infrastructure are scheduled around summer being the peak demand period. Some equipment is still in maintenance mode because the maintenance windows had not closed yet when the heat arrived. The Texas grid, managed by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is a separate system from California's. Texas is not in the direct path of the heat dome, but the Western Interconnection and the Texas Interconnection share some interfaces. The 2021 winter storm in Texas, which killed more than 200 people during a multi-day grid failure, exposed structural vulnerabilities in the Texas system that have not been fully resolved. The Texas grid is recovering, but it is not fully recovered. A regional heat event that pushes the Texas grid hard, especially in combination with mechanical equipment failures, could produce another cascading event. The grid question is also a public health question. When the grid fails during a heat wave, the consequences are not just inconvenient, they are deadly. An elderly person in an apartment without air conditioning for 6 hours during a 105-degree afternoon is in active medical jeopardy. The window for survival shrinks rapidly. Emergency rooms that depend on grid power for cooling and equipment face their own operational challenges if the failure is widespread enough. The compound risk of a heat-driven grid failure is what the energy planners worry about most. Heat wave plus drought plus high winds plus grid stress plus wildfire is the scenario where everything that can go wrong does go wrong at the same time. The 2020 California event came close to that compound scenario. The 2021 Texas event came closer. The 2026 event has not yet reached that scenario, but the ingredients are in place if the system tilts. You have been through a power outage in winter. You know how to layer blankets. What do you do when the outage happens in 100-degree heat? If the August 2020 heat wave caused rolling blackouts in California, and this May heat wave is already more widespread and earlier in the season, what exactly does grid failure look like when 50 million air conditioners turn on at the same time? The 7-day window is the next operational question. The heat dome is forecast to weaken by May 15th. That is the consensus across multiple NOAA forecast products. The omega block pattern is not stable indefinitely. The atmospheric flow eventually reorganizes, the ridge breaks down, and the trapped air mass disperses. According to NOAA's Week 2 Hazards Outlook, the ridge will weaken and shift eastward toward the south-central United States by the end of the second week. A slight risk of extreme heat continues through May 15th across the southwest and the California Central Valley. By late next week, most of the alert footprint should have transitioned to less acute conditions. The cooling trend is not the end of the story. Rapid temperature swings are themselves a hazard for vulnerable populations. A 75-year-old whose body has been struggling through 5 days of triple-digit heat does not bounce back the moment the temperature drops to 85. The cumulative cardiovascular load persists. Some of the deaths that will be attributed to this event will not happen during the peak. They will happen on the backside, after the headlines have moved on and the news cycle has rotated to the next story. The fire risk does not weaken with the heat. The vegetation that has been cured by this heat dome will remain cured for the rest of the season unless meaningful rain arrives, which is not in the forecast. Every degree of cooling helps. But the fuel beds have already been preloaded. A wind event in early June, even with normal June temperatures, will find vegetation that has been brittle since mid-May. The fire season has been front-loaded, and the fire risk will persist. The grid risk also does not vanish when the temperature drops. The maintenance backlog that accumulated during the heat wave will need to be worked through. The equipment that ran hot for several days will need to be inspected. The reserves that were tapped will need to be replenished. The grid emerges from a heat event in a more fragile state than it entered, even when the lights stayed on throughout. The public health risk is the slowest to manifest. The delayed surge in emergency room admissions tends to lag the peak heat by 24 to 72 hours. The mortality data takes weeks to compile. The full death toll of any major heat event is typically not known for months, because excess mortality calculations require comparing observed deaths against expected deaths over the relevant period. The 2021 Pacific Northwest event's death toll was being revised upward through the end of 2021 and into 2022 as the data refined. You have checked the weather before a trip. Now check it like your life depends on it, because for some people, it does. The heat dome formed, the heat dome spread, the heat dome will weaken. And the question nobody can answer is whether the consequences, the fires, the deaths, the grid failures will weaken with it, or whether they are just getting started. Here is what to watch in the next 72 hours. If you live in Arizona, in Maricopa County specifically, the extreme heat warning has expired, but temperatures are still running 9 degrees above normal. Call 211 for cooling center locations. Never leave a child or a pet in a parked car. In this heat, that car becomes lethal in less than 10 minutes. Hydrate before you feel thirsty. Wear lightweight, loose clothing and light colors. Avoid alcohol and caffeine because both accelerate dehydration. Check on elderly neighbors who live alone, especially the ones who might not want to admit they need help. If you live in California's Central Valley, in Fresno, Bakersfield, or anywhere in the San Joaquin Valley, the heat advisory remains active with moderate to major heat risk. Stay indoors during peak heat hours, roughly late morning to early evening. If you work outdoors, take shade breaks every hour. The National Weather Service in Hanford is your local source for updates. Air conditioning at night is not optional during this event. If your unit is not working, find somewhere it is. If you live in Nevada and Las Vegas specifically, hiking trails may be closed. Do not assume you are used to the heat. Las Vegas year-to-date temperatures are running 5 degrees above average. That means your body's internal thermostat is already behind where it would normally be in mid-May. The heat is not just hot. It is hot in a way your body has not had time to prepare for. If you live in the Plains states, in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, or Nebraska, the heat dome is moving toward you. Prepare now. If you do not have air conditioning, identify public cooling locations before you need them. Libraries, community centers, and shopping malls stay cool. The National Weather Service warns that drought conditions, 88% of Nebraska, 81% of Oklahoma, 60% of Kansas, will amplify the heat. The skillet is dry. The burner is coming on. For everyone in the affected region, know the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion shows up as heavy sweating, weakness, cold and clammy skin, a fast but weak pulse. The response is to get to a cool place, drink water, put a cool cloth on the skin, and rest. Heat stroke is different. Heat stroke shows up as high body temperature, hot and dry skin, a rapid and strong pulse, confusion, and possibly unconsciousness. Heat stroke is a 911 emergency. Call immediately. Do not wait. Do not drive yourself. Call. The National Weather Service Heat Risk Tool is available online. It shows 5-day heat risk forecasts at the neighborhood level, color-coded from 0 to 4. 0 is green, little to no risk. 4 is magenta, rare and long-duration heat. Parts of the Southwest are in magenta right now, in May. Bookmark the tool. Check it before any plans involving outdoor exposure. Have a NOAA weather radio if you do not already. The radios provide direct alerts even during power outages when your phone battery may die. Models from Midland and Recom with specific area message encoding will give you county-specific alerts. The cost is modest, the reliability is high. Check on your neighbors, especially the ones over 65. Especially the ones who live alone. Especially the ones who might not want to admit they need help. A knock on the door at 3 in the afternoon during a heat wave is not an intrusion. It is sometimes the only intervention that matters. The next 72 hours, May 14th through May 17th, will tell us whether this heat dome becomes a footnote or a fatality count. The heat dome is real. It arrived weeks earlier than normal. It covers 22 states and affects 50 million Americans. Extreme heat is already the deadliest weather-related killer in the United States. The official data from NOAA, the National Weather Service, and the CDC confirms that this event is not summer. It is a slow-boil emergency with compounding risks from drought, wildfire, and a power grid never tested in May. This is not a story about numbers on a map. This is a story about a morning in which someone over 65 wakes up in a house with no air conditioning and does not realize their heart has been working at double speed for 3 days straight. This is a story about an outdoor worker in the Central Valley who cannot afford to stop because the bills do not stop. This is a story about a firefighter in California who should be training for the season right now, not already fighting it. This is a story about a rancher in western Kansas who has worked through every kind of weather for 50 years and does not know that this kind of weather is different. This is not a story about one heat wave. This is a story about a country that has not yet admitted that the deadliest weather it faces is the weather it refuses to name. The storms get names. The heat gets called summer. And until that changes, the data will keep telling the same story. To everyone in the 22 states under heat alerts tonight, to the 50 million Americans inside the dome, to the neighbors checking on neighbors and the families calling their elderly parents to make sure the air conditioning is on, stay cool, keep watching the heat risk map, and we will be here when the next reading comes in.